On a breezy spring morning, Subin's voice rang through the house, laced with frustration. Mom, can you stop wasting money on that marriage company? Every time you prepare for a meeting, it's costly. If you have so much money, buy me some clothes instead. Subin, with a flick of her elegant red hair, gave her mother one last exasperated look. I'm telling you again, Mom, Subin muttered under her breath. This is the last time. Come on, quick, get out of here, Mrs. Chang snapped, shooing her daughter away. The sun shone brightly as Subin stepped outside, the cherry blossoms swirling gently in the breeze. The weather was too beautiful to match the turmoil in her heart. She paused beneath the trees, letting the petals fall like whispers of freedom. Later, she found herself seated in a quiet cafe, facing yet another suitor her mother had arranged. He was polite and well-mannered, introducing himself as the eldest son of a respected family. He spoke of his hard-working parents and his desire to care for them in their old age. Even as their eldest son, I couldn't help them as much as I wanted, he confessed, his voice tinged with guilt. I want them to be comfortable after they retire. Oh, I see, Subin replied, though her heart wasn't in it. The conversation lingered. How's your father? He asked. He's struggling, Subin admitted. The car accident left him needing help to get around. And your mother? She runs a restaurant, right? How big is it? Just a small tteokbokki shop near a school, she replied curtly. He paused before confessing. It's not that I don't like you, I fell for you at first sight. But as the only child, it's my duty to live with my parents after marriage. Subin's lips curved into a polite smile. I'm afraid we're not meant to be together, she said, standing up gracefully. I hope you meet someone nice. Wait, Subin, the man called after her. She stopped and turned, her expression cold. Why don't you sit down and think about it a bit? You can't possibly take care of your parents forever. You'll get married and become part of my family, he said. Subin's eyes narrowed. Hey, look here, she snapped. How dare you insult my parents? Do you think only you care about family? Keep your so-called advice to yourself. Her glare froze him in place before he turned and bolted. As Subin walked away, she muttered to herself, this temper, who on earth would ever marry me? Subin walked under the relentless rain, her umbrella shielding her from the downpour. She paused to help a mother and child without an umbrella, handing hers over with a kind smile. You have a child. Don't get drenched. Take mine, she said, brushing off the mother's protests. As the mother and child disappeared into the rain, Subin turned to leave but froze. A figure stood under a black umbrella, his sharp features illuminated by the dim streetlight. Oh my God, she exclaimed. What? Who are you? A criminal? A goblin? The man smirked. It's been a long time, Subin, he said, his voice calm yet piercing. Yejun, she muttered. Memories flooded back and her temper flared. You haven't changed. Still butting into other people's business, he remarked. His words teasing, but with an edge. And still that nasty temper, huh? Subin snapped. Why are you here? Are you here to collect debt? He stepped closer, his gaze steady. That's right. I've come here to get what you owe me from 10 years ago. Before she could respond, he leaned in, his next words knocking the air out of her. Let's get married. What? Subin shouted, her voice ringing out over the rain as thunder rumbled in the distance. What did you just say to me? She asked, her tone sharp. He smirked. How are your parents? She hesitated but answered curtly. They're better, thanks to you. We need to talk now, he said, his tone serious. Is it urgent? Can we do it another time? She asked, trying to brush him off. But he didn't respond and began walking away. Hey, wait, Subin called out after him. Where are your manners? How can you leave someone drenched while holding an umbrella all to yourself? She complained. He glanced back briefly, brushing his shoulder dismissively. I see, you haven't changed a bit, she muttered. And you're just as shameless as ever, he retorted. They locked eyes, both clearly annoyed with each other, the tension between them palpable. Few days ago, Yejun sat before his father, a tense confrontation unfolding. His father's ultimatum echoed through the room. You have 1 month to get married. If you fail, don't even dream of inheriting the business. Yejun's jaw tightened. You know I don't want to get married. His father slammed his fist on the table. Then you leave me no choice. After a month, I'll take everything back. Yejun's jaw clenched as he asked, Is it because I'm not your real son? His father's gaze hardened. You can't even pay back the kindness I've shown you. Your grandmother only has 6 months left. What do you plan to do? Yejun fell silent, the weight of the situation pressing on him. Later, facing Subin, he leaned forward. Let's get married. Seeing her stunned reaction, he sighed and repeated with emphasis, This is the 3rd time I've had to say it. Let's get married. Her laughter was dry and sarcastic. Is this some kind of prank? Do you think I have time for this? I'm serious, he replied, unflinching. If we stay married for 1 year, I'll clear your debt. All of it. Her eyes narrowed. Marriage isn't a joke. Do you think you can toy with people's emotions just because you're rich? You're not interested in marriage anyway, he shot back. Why else would you reject 13 blind dates? Do your parents know you don't want to get married? He asked. Her expression turned to shock. Did you do a background check on me? Unbothered, Yejun smirked. What do you think? Do you really believe I came here without a plan? You know better than anyone, Subin. I always have a plan. Subin clenched her fists, thinking to herself, he's right. Yejun never strikes a deal unless it benefits him. That's just how he operates. Standing up, she shot him a glare. You can stop coming after me. I'll pay you back no matter what. And how do you plan on doing that? He retorted, his tone sharp. I gave you 10 years with no interest, and you still haven't made good on it. As you're well aware, next month marks the end of our contract. Whatever your circumstances may be, I intend to collect in full. She bit her lip, refusing to show the frustration brewing inside. As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. Just think about it. If you can make it for 1 year, you and your family won't have to worry about money anymore. Fuming, Subin stormed out of the room without another word. Yejun let out a quiet sigh as she disappeared. Outside, Subin muttered under her breath, anger bubbling up. Yejun, how dare he suggest something like that? She spotted his umbrella by the door, grabbed it, and stomped off. Clutching the umbrella tightly, she muttered in frustration. I hope he falls into a puddle of mud. Serves him right. As Subin reached home, her mother inquired about her date. She had almost forgotten about the strange encounter earlier. Brushing off her mother's curiosity, she said, I'm tired. I'll go to bed now. Good night. After freshening up, she lay on her bed, recalling how Yejun had once lent her family $100,000, saving them from a dire situation. But now, the problem was that he wanted marriage in return. Her mind drifted back to when they first met in 6th grade. From the moment they crossed paths, she knew they were destined to clash. Years ago, Yejun was a new transfer student, sitting alone while everyone whispered about his good looks. Subin, trying to be friendly, approached him with a chocolate milk. He glanced at her for a few seconds before replying, I don't want it. Just go away and mind your own business, sticking out his tongue. Fine then, I'll pour it on your handsome face, she retorted angrily. From that day, they became rivals. The next day, their teacher asked, please raise your hand if you haven't submitted the money for the trip yet. Subin noticed Yejun raising his hand. Later, on her way home, she heard commotion and saw Yejun being harassed by students who snatched his money. Feeling sorry for him, she brought an envelope with her trip money the next day and secretly left it under Yejun's desk. Later, a student shouted, Sir, I can't find my money for the trip. All eyes turned to Yejun. Someone murmured, I heard Yejun's mom ran away, and he lives with his grandmother in a basement. Did he really steal the money? The teacher called Yejun to the front. Subin tried to explain, but the teacher silenced her, assuming she was covering for him. The lost money was eventually found, and the case was closed, but the damage was done. After class, Subin grabbed Yejun's shirt and said, I'm sorry. I was just trying to help. Trying to help? And that makes everything okay? You just wanted to feel good about yourself, he snapped, shaking her hand off. How can I make it up to you? She asked. Forget it, I don't need your help, he retorted, leaning closer. But mark my words, I'll get my revenge. I'll make sure you feel the same judgment I did. From that day, their relationship soured, and Subin never got the chance to properly apologize. Life took unexpected turns. After her father's business failed, Subin's family moved to a neighborhood where Yejun lived. Climbing the stairs, she recalled how Yejun, now living with his mother's new rich husband, seemed distant and changed. One day, she noticed 2 students fighting. One of them was Yejun. He stood up to retaliate when someone shouted for a teacher. Outside the teacher's office, Subin confronted him as he walked out. You did that on purpose, didn't you? She accused. I thought we agreed to ignore each other. Just get lost, he replied coldly. Hey, wait, that kid attacked you because you took his student council spot, didn't you? I saw how you whispered something to provoke him. She pressed. So what? Yejun replied indifferently. What do you mean, so what? Are you just looking for trouble? She demanded. What's the problem? Spare me your lectures about forgiveness. Save it for someone who cares, he said dismissively. Anger flared within her. Revenge only leads to more revenge, she yelled, grabbing his arm. He turned, looking at her. What's this? Trying to act brave while you're scared you'll be their next target? He leaned closer. Stay out of my life. As he walked away, she thought, Yejun was lucky not to get expelled from school. The other kids came from respectable families. But now Yejun is on equal footing. Yet, he's still so determined to seek revenge because of how they used to bully him. He's changed, fearless now, because he has everything. In their senior year, Subin's father's shop was attacked by a gang demanding street tax, leaving her father hospitalized. They were left with nothing. Just as she felt the most hopeless, the one who reached out was him. Good afternoon, Yejun said politely to her mother. This is where Subin lives, right? I'm her friend Yejun Ji. I'm not sure I should accept your help, Subin's mom said hesitantly. It's not a big deal, Yejun assured her. Besides, I've received help before. In fact, Subin helped me by paying for my school trip. He explained that he was lending her 100K USD with 10 years to repay. Since it was his money, he said Subin could start paying it back once she earned on her own. It seemed like a generous gesture, almost heartwarming. But how can I accept such a large sum? Her mother asked, worried. The amount doesn't matter, it's the thought that counts, Yejun said with a reassuring smile. This is my mother's secretary, and she'll help with the paperwork. Here's the contract. He handed the papers to Subin's mom and glanced at Subin. That's what friends do for each other, right? Patting Subin on the shoulder, he added, You don't need to feel bad. It's not like I'm giving you free money. If you don't pay me back, there's nowhere you can run where I won't find you, so make sure you repay me. With that, he walked away. Subin stood there, clenching her fists. So this is how he felt, humiliated, when he was accused of stealing the school trip money I gave him. This is his revenge, she thought bitterly. Back in the present, her colleagues called out to her. Miss Shin, it's been a month since your promotion. Are you finally going to treat us to dinner tonight? She hesitated, but, seeing no escape, agreed. After dinner, as she checked her bank balance, she sighed. There goes all my money, she thought. I work hard to earn this, but it never feels like it's mine. No matter how much I make, it's gone as soon as I earn it. There's no joy in it. But I should be thankful to Yejun. If it weren't for him, I'd have had to go to loan sharks, she admitted to herself. Yejun's words echoed in her mind. If you marry me for 1 year, I'll clear your debt, all of it. But how could I marry him, she murmured, brushing the thought aside. I was close to saving enough, but I had to pay my dad's hospital bills first, she thought. Again, Yejun's voice rang in her ears. Listen, Subin, 1 year. It'll be enough for you to live a peaceful life with your parents. Don't you want to open a restaurant for your mom? I'm asking for just 1 year. You'll be free forever afterward. Just get out of my head, you little devil, she muttered, shaking her head. Her phone buzzed with a message from a friend inviting her to a wedding. Should I also get married? She thought, but quickly dismissed it. At the wedding, she greeted her friend and took pictures. As she walked with another friend, they murmured, I heard her husband is very rich. I never thought she'd get married so soon after her breakup. I thought she'd marry her boyfriend. But I guess you have to be realistic when it comes to marriage. What do you think, Subin? I guess you're right, she replied awkwardly. Most lovey-dovey couples end up divorced anyway. Who can blame someone for valuing money? As the conversation continued, Subin thought to herself, I always believed I'd choose love over money. I dreamed of becoming a good wife to someone, but life clearly had other plans. Suddenly, her friend exclaimed, Oh, who's that guy? He's really handsome. Subin glanced in the direction her friend pointed. Her heart skipped a beat. Wait, am I seeing things? Why does he look like Yejun? Am I thinking about him so much that I'm imagining him here? But then, he turned and looked directly at her. Her mouth dropped in shock. Oh, it really is him. What's he doing on the groom's side? Panicking, she quickly changed direction, trying to avoid running into him. As Subin stood at the food counter, Yejun approached from behind. Still a big eater, he remarked. Startled, she turned around. What are you doing here? She asked. The groom is our manager's son, so I'm here because of work, he replied calmly. She laughed at his explanation. What a lame excuse. At least come up with a better one. Believe it or not, I'm not lying, he said evenly. She glared at him, clenching her teeth. Tell me the truth, you followed me here, didn't you? She accused. Isn't it the other way around? He countered indifferently, leaving her jaw to drop. Angrily, she focused on getting food onto her plate and walked off to find a seat, hoping to eat in peace. But moments later, a man called out, Hey, Yejun, you can sit here. Yejun joined the table and took the empty seat beside her. Subin glared at him as someone asked, Director, do you know her? Yejun nodded. Yes, we were classmates in school. Her friend nudged her. You should have told us earlier, they exclaimed, then turned to Yejun. What do you do for a living? I heard someone call you director. The man beside Yejun handed over a business card. Here, take a look. We work for a travel agency. Everyone's eyes widened as they read the card. The man explained, He's the director of our company. While they were talking, an old classmate approached. How are you all? He asked, his eyes landing on Subin. Oh, Subin, you're here too. You look even more beautiful now. Subin frowned. Ah, Choi Jizong, the biggest jerk from school, she thought. Should I be glad to see you? She asked coldly. Oh, still tough, huh? He said smugly. What am I supposed to do, impress you? She retorted, annoyed. He grinned. Well, I'm pretty popular, you know. Guess who I work for now? She ignored him, but he persisted. Hey, did you hear what I said? Yes, I heard. I also heard you sell fake products. Even that watch you're wearing is fake, she replied, pointing at his wrist. Angered, he snapped back. Oh yeah? By the way, what happened to that guy you were with? I heard he dumped you for some rich girl. Subin clenched her fist in fury. Just shut up, she warned. I guess it's true then, isn't it? He taunted. I heard you spent a lot of time at his place. How do you plan to get married now? Does anyone even want to marry you? Subin stood abruptly, fork in hand, ready to attack him, but Yejun grabbed her wrist. Don't waste your energy on him. No need to respond to barking dogs, he said calmly. Feeling humiliated, Jisung barked, Do you even know who I am? Why should I care? Yejun replied indifferently, patting Subin's hand. Don't pay attention to him. Jisung sneered. Oh, I see you've got someone wrapped around your finger. Is he your boyfriend? Yejun smirked. I'm fine with it. Now stop blabbering. As Jisung tried to escalate the situation, Yejun's calm demeanor remained unchanged. He totally ruined the mood, didn't he? Yejun said, turning to Subin. Let's go outside and get something to eat. Subin, shocked by his sudden suggestion, stood up to leave. But as she moved, Jisung stood and lunged at her. Before he could do anything, Yejun stepped in, splashing water in his face. Staff members quickly intervened and dragged Jisung away. Now you've crossed the line. Stop being rude, Yejun said firmly. As everyone checked on Subin, one of her friends asked, Are you two a couple? There's no way, Subin shouted angrily, but her friends noticed Yejun's smile. Well, Subin, it doesn't seem like he thinks the same, they teased. Hey, what's with that grin? She shouted at Yejun. Stop making weird faces. I'm just pursuing her, Yejun declared, shocking everyone. Her friends turned to Subin. Oh, I don't believe it. Is it true? No, it's not true. He's just joking. Subin tried desperately to explain. Yejun leaned closer. I'm not joking. Don't you remember? I asked you to marry me the other day, he said, his grin widening. Subin pointed a finger at him, furious. What are you saying? Capturing her hand, he said, I'll be good to you, so why don't you stop wandering around and settle down with me? Pulling her up, he added, Let's go outside. Once outside, she slapped his hand away. Have you lost your mind? What did you just say in front of my friends? She demanded. He poked her forehead. You should be thanking me. I saved you back there. I didn't ask for your help, she retorted. Did I ask for your help back then? Why did you help me? He shot back. Feeling annoyed, she said, Let's get this straight. You didn't help me there. What do you mean? He asked, puzzled. You're just building a backstory for your fake marriage project, aren't you? She accused. He smirked. That's smarter than I thought. Angered, she swung a punch, but he dodged and she lost her balance. Before she could fall, he caught her, wrapping an arm around her. Where's your manners? Some people just don't know how to be grateful, he said with a sigh. He began walking toward the exit. Now, let's go get something to eat, he said, but she stood frozen, unsure of what had just happened. He returned, leaning closer. Are you coming or not? Let's go eat. I think I'll pass, she said awkwardly. He glanced at her. Subin, it's just a meal. Just like chocolate milk is chocolate milk. I know you haven't eaten. If you don't want food, we can get a drink. Subin remembered the time she offered him chocolate milk. It felt oddly familiar. Lost in thought, she didn't respond. He turned around. Hurry up, I'm a busy man, he said impatiently. She finally agreed and followed him. As they were leaving, she glanced at him, thinking, he looks kind of handsome when he's mad. I hate to admit it, but he really does have good looks. Now that I'm in this situation, I should probably thank him, but I couldn't. Maybe I'm starting to understand things better as I get older. As they got into his car, he asked, What do you want to eat? You're the one buying, so you decide, she replied. Okay, let's get barbecue since you like it, he said. As he drove, his phone rang. Answering it, his face turned serious. His grandfather informed him that his grandmother had collapsed. He sped up, alarming Subin. What are you doing? Stop driving like a maniac, she yelled. I need to get to the hospital. My grandmother collapsed, he explained. Recalling how his grandmother had once helped her family, Subin ordered, Step on it. They hurried to the hospital without wasting a moment. At the hospital, Yejun sat by his grandmother's side. As she woke up, he asked softly, How are you feeling? She patted his hand with a reassuring smile. I'm fine, Yejun. Don't worry about me. This is nothing. I can fight it. He held her hand tightly. Please, don't leave me, he said. She squeezed his hand gently. I'm not going anywhere. Meanwhile, Subin stood outside, feeling awkward. Peeking into the room, she was caught by Yejun's grandfather. Are you here to meet my wife? He asked. Subin awkwardly bowed. Hello, I'm Yejun's friend, she replied. Misunderstanding her presence, he grabbed her hand and led her inside. Oh, you must be his girlfriend. You were with him when I called, weren't you? Before she could explain, he called out, Honey, look who's here. This beautiful lady is Yejun's girlfriend. Hearing the compliment, Subin smiled nervously. Yejun stepped forward, trying to intervene. "Wait, Grandpa." He started, but before he could explain, his grandmother exclaimed, "Oh, Yejun's girlfriend! I've always wanted to meet you." As she tried to sit up, her hand slipped. Both men rushed to help her, but Subin was the first to catch her. "Are you all right, Grandma?" Subin asked, steadying her. "Oh my, what a lovely woman," his grandmother said warmly. "What's your name?" "I'm Subin," she introduced herself. "How long have you known each other?" his grandmother asked. "We've known each other since school," Subin replied. "Well, how did Yejun manage to find such a beautiful girl from school?" his grandmother said with a smile. Subin felt a pang of discomfort, recalling how her ex's family had treated her poorly because of her background. Yet, Yejun's grandmother's kindness felt strangely comforting. Smiling, Subin said, "It's so nice to meet you. I hope you get better soon." From behind, Yejun observed their interaction. I was right, he thought. Subin is definitely the one. As they left the hospital, the car ride was silent, both feeling slightly awkward. Gathering courage, Subin broke the silence. "Are you still hungry? I know a good place." They went to the restaurant and ordered food and drinks. This time, Yejun spoke first. "Subin, you should seriously consider my offer. There's no reason for you to decline it." Subin hesitated, then said, "I'm sorry about your grandmother. That money I lent you was actually hers," Yejun revealed. "She gave it to me without telling the rest of the family. To be precise, I borrowed it from her." He glanced at her, thinking, "I don't want to use sympathy, but this is the best way to convince Subin." Subin sat quietly, thinking, "I'm really grateful to her, but how can I agree to a fake marriage? It doesn't feel right. Is this really the only solution?" Finally, she asked, "So, you still want to get married?" "My father is a man of his word," Yejun explained. "He wouldn't hesitate to strip me of everything just to prove a point. If that happens, the only thing I'll have left is the money I lent you." He glanced at her. From the moment he was born, his grandmother had been the only one who truly cared for him. Even after his mother took him into her new home, it was still his grandmother who stood by him. That new home, where everyone seemed like a family, only made him feel more isolated. It was his grandmother's wish for him to marry a kind-hearted girl, and he couldn't ignore it. Subin looked at him intently. "Does your grandmother really mean that much to you? Or are you just pissed at your father and trying to take everything you can from him?" Pouring herself a drink, she added, "Now, let's be honest. What's the real deal? I may be their son on paper, but they never treated me like one of their own," Yejun said firmly. "My father controls everything I do, never letting me achieve anything for myself. Once I get my share of the inheritance, I'm leaving this country, and you can go back to your life with the money you'll receive. So, in other words, we're a team of thieves," Subin said, slightly drunk. "And we're plotting to rob your family?" "That's right," Yejun replied without hesitation. "Yejun," she called out drunkenly, repeating his name several times. Irritated, he asked, "What is it? Just say it." "I'm saying." "It must have been hard for you," she said. "I want to comfort you, but I know you wouldn't like that. I don't even know what to say because you'll probably think I'm judging you again. If you want me to feel better, then stop with the lame sympathy and accept the offer. That's a win-win for both of us," he said. "Do you still hate me?" she asked. "Yes, I do," he said bluntly. "And you shouldn't develop any attachment to me. I need someone who will strictly keep it business. That's why you were my first choice. Once things get personal, you become useless to me." "What will you do if I become useless? Will you just abandon me?" she asked quietly. "Do you really need that answer?" he replied. "It's simple. If you become useless, I'll abandon you without a second thought. There's no reason to keep you close." He placed money on the table. "Take a cab home. We'll talk when you're sober," he said, standing up. "Make sure to reconsider. It's not just me, we're both standing on the edge of a cliff," he added before leaving. Subin stared at the money on the table and muttered angrily, "What a heartless man." Later, she took the bus home. Standing there, she realized that he was right. She needed his help, and this was the harsh reality of her situation. The next day, after finishing work, Subin planned to head home and rest as soon as possible. As she was walking, someone called out, "Subin, it's been a while. How have you been?" The voice belonged to her ex-boyfriend. She turned around and snapped, "Don't come near me." She tried her best to remain calm, hiding any emotions she had practiced suppressing so many times. He walked closer and placed a hand on her head. "I'm sorry, Subin. This must be a surprise for you," he said gently. She smacked his hand away. "Hey, get your hand off me! How dare you show your face to me? What are you doing here?" she asked angrily, trying to stay composed. "What can I do to make you feel better?" he asked. "You'd have to be born again for that," she replied firmly. "You can punch me if you want," he suggested. "I'm not like you," she retorted. "Are you still mad at me?" he asked further. "Yes. I'll be mad at you as long as I live, so just get lost," she replied irritably. As they argued, her phone rang. It was from an unknown number. She answered, Hello? It's me, said a familiar voice on the other end. Her eyes widened in realization. She glanced at the man in front of her and responded into the phone. I told you to get some rest. Why are you calling me again, honey? She emphasized the last word with fake affection. Yejun on the other end was taken aback by her sudden change in tone. Did you miss me that much? She asked sweetly. Have you lost your mind? Yejun replied, confused. Of course I miss you too. Where are you now, honey? She continued, maintaining the pretense. First of all, I'm not your honey and I'm near your mom's restaurant, he replied sharply. Well, I'm at the bus stop. Could you come pick me up? Someone annoying here is giving me trouble, she said, observing her ex-boyfriend's reaction. I don't know what's going on, but we'll talk about it later. I'll be there in 5 minutes, Yejun replied. Subin hung up and looked at her ex. See? Do you need any further explanation? Why don't you go and mind your business? She said. He stared at her, unmoving. Why isn't he leaving? I don't have a plan B, she thought nervously. Are you two getting married? He asked. Of course. Do I look like someone who plays around and betrays their lover? She replied coldly. No, you're not. You're a good woman, he admitted. I don't need your sugar-coated words. Just go away already, she said, turning away. But he grabbed her hand. Wait, there's something I need to ask you, he said. She turned back to face him, worried he might catch on to her lie. He wasn't the type to believe anything without proof. Let me go, she demanded. There he is, your boyfriend, he said, looking behind her. Yejun approached confidently. Leaning close to Subin, he whispered, Hey, darling, sorry for making you wait, making her flinch. Turning to her ex, Yejun spoke sharply. Excuse me, why are you holding someone else's woman's hand? Let go of her while I'm still asking nicely. He threw her ex's hand off hers. See? I told you he's my fiancé, Subin said with a bright yet awkward smile. Her ex stared at them in silence, but was interrupted by a call and stepped aside to answer it. Yejun leaned close to Subin and whispered, Your fiancé, huh? So what? She retorted. He tightened his grip on her. Then answer me now. Are you going to marry me or not? What's your answer? What are you talking about? Can't you see the situation? This is the worst time, she replied, frustrated. For me, it's the best time to get an answer from you, he said firmly. She looked at him, thinking, no wonder this man is a sly fox. Why else would he come all the way here just to save me? Let's get married, he declared. Subin glanced at her ex, unsure of what to do. Yejun wrapped his arms around her from behind and squeezed gently. Why aren't you answering? He asked. What if I don't answer? She countered. Then excuse me, do I know you? He replied nonchalantly. Are you really going to turn on me like that? She asked, frustrated. Look, Subin, I don't know this man, but I guess he'll be a pain for you. You have until I count to 3, he said seriously, playing with her hand as he began to count. 1, T2. Wait, Subin called out, shutting her eyes. Okay, let's get married, she said with great difficulty. Yejun's grin widened. Still playing with her hair, he said, no takebacks, okay? Then in one swift motion, he turned her around and kissed her passionately, sealing their deal. When he finally let her go, she stood there in shock, her eyes wide. Smiling, he said, I love you, Subin. Placing a hand on her shoulder, he declared, We'll take our leave now. Turning to her ex, he added, My dear Subin is hungry, so we won't be able to accompany you. Get home safely. With that, they walked away, leaving her ex-boyfriend behind. Later, as they sat for dinner, seeing Subin's dazed expression, Yejun remarked, I think it's about time you come to your senses. She blushed, still caught up in the memory of their kiss. Trying to focus on her frustration, she asked, But why did you have to kiss me? Recalling the incident, Yejun replied, It wasn't an actual kiss. I kissed the corner of your lips and covered it with my hand so your ex wouldn't see. Don't you get it yet? He was trying to figure out if you were lying, so I had to make him believe you. Subin fell silent, realizing he was right. She took a sip of her drink and said, So, how did you get my number? It wasn't hard, he answered nonchalantly. Seriously? Stop stalking me and digging into my background, she retorted. You told me not to barge in unannounced, so I decided to call first, he explained. Subin paused, then asked seriously, Yejun, I have a question. Why me? Yejun responded bluntly, I didn't choose you because you're my type. You're not mine either, she shot back. Exactly. That's what makes us perfect business partners. Besides, I'll enjoy teasing you while we live together, he added with a smirk. Annoyed, Subin stood up. All right, I'm going home, she said. But we haven't finished talking, he protested. It's getting late and my mom will be angry, she replied, turning to leave. However, as she turned, dizziness overwhelmed her, and the next second, she collapsed. Yejun sat there dumbfounded, unsure of what had just happened. The next morning, Subin opened her eyes, finding herself in a comfortable bed. Where am I? Whose room is this? She wondered, staring at the white ceiling. Turning to her side, she froze in shock. Yejun was lying next to her, shirtless. "Are you awake? Did you sleep well?" he asked, his voice still groggy. Unable to respond or move, Subin slowly peeked under the sheets and realized she wasn't wearing anything either. Panic surged through her. "Oh my God, did it really happen?" she whispered in horror. "What do you mean?" Yejun asked, still half asleep. "Why aren't you wearing anything?" she asked, trying to keep her composure. "I always sleep like this," he replied casually, tossing the other side. Finally gathering her courage, Subin asked, Did we really sleep together?" Yejun stared at her for a moment, seemingly enjoying her flustered state. Shifting slightly, she noticed a tissue stuffed in his nose. "Is that a tissue? Did you have a nosebleed?" she asked. "What else would it be for?" he replied matter-of-factly. "Did you overdo it?" she blurted out without thinking. "Do I really have to answer that?" he asked back. "I'm losing my mind," Subin muttered, laughing nervously. She couldn't process what had happened or what to do next. After a moment, Yejun asked, "You don't remember anything about last night, do you?" Without answering, Subin slid deeper under the sheets. The next moment, she bolted from the bed, wrapping the sheet around herself. As she ran, she stepped on something, her undergarment. She froze. "Why is this here?" she shouted. "Poor thing," Yejun muttered, smirking. Turning, she demanded, "Where are my clothes? Give them back to me." Trying to suppress his laughter, he pointed. "Over there." Subin ran to the bathroom and slammed the door shut. Sitting on the floor, she covered her face in embarrassment. How could this happen? This is so humiliating, she thought. Later, she found her clothes, got up and put them on, thinking, I even washed my clothes. How did I manage to do that? But wait, my clothes are here, and I still had my bottom undergarment on. But my makeup is smudged. Oh God, what is going on? Did I really do it with my enemy? Clothed, she stood by the door, hesitating to step outside. If it happened, then it was a mistake. For both of us. That's what I'll tell him. Let's just forget it, she thought. Finally, she opened the door to find Yejun standing there, waiting. Are you taking up residency in there, or what? What took you so long? I thought you fell and broke your nose, he said. Why do you care? She snapped. Now just get out of my way, he said, brushing past her into the room and pushing her aside. Angrily, she turned back, muttering, What a jerk. Now close the door and leave, he ordered. I have something to say, she replied. What is it? He asked. So, about last night, she began, but he interrupted her. Are you going to say something stupid like forget it after everything you've done to me? He asked, pointing to his nose. She looked down, taking a deep breath. I'm just saying, you don't know me well. I don't sleep with random guys after getting drunk, but if we really did sleep together, then it was a mistake, she admitted. He stepped closer. A mistake? Say that again. I know I was drunk, but he was part of it too. Why does it feel like I'm the only one at fault? She thought. So, what do you want from me? If you're not going to forget it, what are you going to do? She asked. You made a promise to me, and you better remember what I want from you, he replied firmly. She stood in front of him, fumbling for a response, but before she could say anything, her phone rang. Grateful for the distraction, she ran to answer it. I need to take this, she said. It was her mom's voice on the other end. Panicking about what to say, Subin lied. I'm at Jisu's place. Okay, anyway, no one's home. Your father slipped on the stairs, so we're at the hospital. He's fine, don't worry. Just take care of the restaurant. I left in a hurry, her mom said. When the call ended, Subin sat down, worried. Every time Dad is admitted to the hospital, Mom tells me not to worry, but it's happening more often now, she thought, her anxiety mounting. Suddenly, she felt water droplets on her head. Looking up, she saw Yejun standing over her. Hey, what's wrong? Did something happen? He asked, his voice filled with concern. My dad. He got hurt again, she replied softly. Alarmed, Subin suddenly stood up, catching Yejun off guard. A moment later, she bolted out of the room. Hey, you left your phone and stuff here, Yejun shouted after her. Later, he placed her belongings in his car. I'll give you a ride, he said to her. She hesitated, standing still. He grabbed her arm gently but firmly. Come on now, hurry up, he said, pulling her toward the car. Sitting in the car, Subin was lost in thought, nibbling at her nails. Yejun snapped her out of it. Hey, Subin, you need to pull yourself together, he said firmly. When they reached the restaurant, she saw the mess left behind. It was clear her mom had left in a hurry. Why does she always tell me everything is okay when it's not? She thought. After tidying up, she locked the restaurant. I'll take you to the hospital, Yejun said. Subin called her mom to ask for the hospital details, and her mom asked them to bring coffee on the way. Yejun stepped out, bought the coffee, and handed it to Subin. Here, take this with you, he said. Why are you being so nice? You really don't need to, she started, but as she got out of the car, she stumbled. Before she could fall, Yejun caught her. Are you sure you can make it on your own? He asked, grabbing her hand and leading her toward the entrance. "Hey, I can go by myself," she protested. "Really? Then at least get a grip on yourself first," he replied. She stared at him blankly as he continued leading her. Watching his back, she thought, he's not someone I should rely on. I know that deep down. But once again, I've let him take the lead in my life. When they arrived at the hospital, Subin rushed toward her father's room, leaving Yejun behind. He stood silently, watching her figure disappear. As she approached the room, she overheard her parents talking. Just as she was about to knock, she paused, hearing them discuss her blind dates. After her breakup, she never got along with anyone, her father said. "Don't mention that Jeonho in front of me," her mom snapped. "Why are you so angry? I thought they were in love," her dad said. Subin pushed the door open. "I told you I'm not getting married," she declared. "Because of our family situation, no matter how hard I try, I'll end up in the same situation with another family." She added, "Don't worry. It's not like we're asking you to marry a rich guy. We just want you to find someone who will love you," her mother explained. "Stop daydreaming, mother. There's no one like that," Subin replied. "Subin, I understand your concerns, but I just want you to be happy. Even if something happens to me, I need to know you'll be in safe hands," her father said worriedly. She knew her father feared for her future after he was gone, but, "Let me take care of myself. Please leave me alone," she said tiredly. "Why didn't the last guy work out?" her mother asked. "Didn't you hear what I just said?" Subin snapped. "Do you even realize how much humiliation I've faced on those blind dates? What happened? Did they do something to you?" her mother asked, concerned. "All you care about is that I marry someone and settle down. But I like being alone. I'd rather live and die alone," Subin yelled before running outside, unable to contain her emotions any longer. As she stepped outside, she saw Yejun standing there. Their eyes met, but neither spoke. Subin quickly turned and ran away from him. Moments later, her mother came running out and spotted Yejun. "You're Yejun, right?" she asked. "Hello, Auntie. Long time no see," he replied politely. "Have you come with Subin?" she asked, a bit embarrassed. "Yes. I thought I'd give her some privacy, so I was waiting outside. Please send my regards to Uncle. I'll visit again," Yejun said, and turned to leave. "Wait," her mother said, grabbing his shirt. "Yes?" he asked, turning back to her. "Are you here to collect your debt from Subin?" "Please don't worry, I haven't forgotten, and will pay you back," she said nervously. Yejun stared at her for a moment before replying, "Please excuse me, Auntie, I need to go now." As he walked away, he heard her voice behind him. "Please, look after my Subin." On the other side, Subin sat alone at the bus stop. Yejun soon found her and offered her a ride. She refused at first, but he didn't listen, leading her straight to his car. Sitting in the passenger seat, her tears wouldn't stop, dripping continuously down her cheeks, wounding her pride. Yejun offered her a hand towel. Though it annoyed her, she accepted it. She knew her parents wanted her to get married. She, too, had once dreamed of marrying young and living a happy life. That was why she'd promised to marry her first love, Gunho. But her father's sudden accident had turned everything upside down, and in the aftermath, she broke up with Gunho. When her parents found out about the breakup, they urged her to meet other people. It wasn't that she had failed in life, they simply didn't know the real reason behind the breakup. Since then, the fantasy she once held about marriage had crumbled, leaving only emptiness behind. "Did you hear that?" she asked Yejun softly. She went on to explain that she couldn't just leave her parents alone. What if she told them she was getting married, only for them to later discover it was a lie? How would they feel then? Like she had sold herself off just to pay off a debt. Her parents knew about her old fantasy of marriage, which was why they were so eager for her to marry. But she didn't want to shackle someone else into that dream just for the sake of appearances. Yejun calmly offered to do it with him, not someone else. He told her that if she married him, her story could change. He might not be a good husband to her, but he could be a good son-in-law to her parents. Subin's anger flared. Did he not understand what she was saying? What would happen after a year? Wouldn't he just be stuck in her parents' hearts, leaving behind more pain? But Yejun explained that he understood everything. Besides, it wasn't just about paying off debt. This way, they could live freely without being tied down in a real marriage with someone else. Once their promised time was over, he would move abroad. He could return occasionally to visit, and he would also make sure she was compensated enough to live comfortably. If she ever met someone she truly liked, she could just tell him. He would take care of everything, even let her blame him for the fallout. Most importantly, he promised that this arrangement wouldn't hurt anyone or make anyone unhappy. Then he turned to her and asked if she had changed her mind. She looked tempted, and he could see it. "If you're still hesitating," he said, "then I just need to shake you with all my might." This was her last chance to walk away. He told her he'd count to 3, and if she wanted to leave, she was free to do so. But before he could begin, she stopped him. There was something she needed to confirm first. She told him to meet her tomorrow after work. As thanks for today, she would treat him to dinner. Watching the car disappear into the distance, she felt resolute. Maybe she could give it a try. The next day, Subin and her colleague stepped out of the office and noticed a handsome man standing nearby. Her colleague couldn't believe her eyes. Subin nudged her and playfully asked, "Watch how I impress that guy." As Subin walked away, her colleague observed in awe. Subin had not only made the man laugh within seconds, but was now holding his hand. The girl stood there, stunned. How could someone like Subin charm a guy like that so easily? Subin turned back toward them and whispered something mischievously before walking away with Yejun. She brought him to a street-side food stall that sold chicken feet. Yejun frowned as he took in the place and the food she wanted to eat. He opted out of eating and said he would just drink. Subin insisted he try the food, but he refused. That was exactly what she wanted. He needed to be drunk for what she had planned to find out tonight. As time passed and the drinks flowed, Subin asked him again, "Why me? Why are you choosing me?" Yejun paused, caught off guard by her sudden question, and then replied honestly, "Because you're perfect for this deal. No one else fits the role like you do." Subin laughed lightly and said, "Well, you're not bad yourself, considering what happened between us the other night." Yejun frowned at her words. "Is that what you wanted to check? If we really slept together?" She nodded and he sighed in frustration. "You've got it all wrong. No matter how much I might hate you, I'm not the kind of scumbag who would take advantage of a drunk woman." Subin, flaring with anger, shouted, "Then why did you say we slept together?" Finally, Yejun explained, "You hit me in the face with your head. I got a nosebleed. You threw up all over your clothes, so I washed them. And afterward, I was so exhausted, I just fell asleep instead of taking you home." He sighed deeply. "If only I had just slept on the couch that day, I wouldn't be seen as some kind of pervert." With a firm voice, he added, "You don't have to worry, I don't see you as a woman." Fuming, Subin snapped back, "Well, good. You're not a man to me either." Then, with a serious tone, Yejun asked, "So? Have you gotten your answer? Will you marry me now?" She looked at him. In this moment, Yejun wasn't just some man. He was someone handling a serious deal. Lazily, she nodded and agreed to the marriage, pulling out a bottle to celebrate. Her goal tonight was to get him drunk. But as time passed, it was Subin who slumped over the table, seemingly drunk. Yejun, not falling for it this time, stood up to leave. But as he reached the door and saw a group of drunk men approaching, he couldn't bring himself to leave her there. In the end, he had to carry her on his back again. When they reached home, he harshly let her down and she fell to the ground. As he walked away, Subin got up, completely sober, and cursed him under her breath for dropping her like that. But her goal was clear. Even if it was a fake marriage, she needed to check this man thoroughly. She couldn't trust anyone without proof. Meanwhile, Yejun took a quick shower. Subin, hearing him return, quickly collapsed on the floor again. As he entered the room in a bathrobe, he stared at her, confused. Why was she upside down? Was she awake earlier when he came in? Subin, pretending to sleep, felt strange under his gaze. Why was he staring at her like that? With no other choice, Yejun bent down and picked her up into his arms. His hair was still damp from the shower, and water droplets slid down, landing on her face. His scent filled her nostrils. She peeked at him through half-closed eyes, then quickly shut them again, pretending to sleep. He'd had a drink too, but he wasn't drunk. What a tough guy, she thought. While she was lost in thought, Yejun suddenly tossed her onto the bed with a thud. She cursed under her breath again, while he calmly started pressing her shirt. Her gaze drifted to him and widened. The man had taken off his bathrobe, revealing a firm, sculpted body. She wasn't in the habit of spying on others, but she just couldn't look away. Sensing something, Yejun turned around. Subin quickly shut her eyes, trying to look like she was in a deep sleep. He leaned over her, calling her name softly. Then he lightly tapped and caressed her cheek as if trying to wake her up. Subin waited for any inappropriate move, ready to call him out. But instead, he rudely pinched her cheek and grumbled, "I shouldn't have brought you home. Grown woman, and all you know is how to get drunk and pass out." Annoyed, he stood up and left the room. Subin opened her eyes in disbelief. That was it? All her efforts to expose him had failed. But she was relieved. She could trust him. And now she was sure nothing had happened that night either. She picked up her phone and called him. Yejun, surprised, answered, "Weren't you unconscious just a minute ago?" Ignoring his question, Subin replied coolly, "We can set the family meeting next week for the marriage. Let's meet my parents first, then yours." Yejun sighed. He had been worried for nothing. This woman wasn't drunk at all. But Subin now had complete clarity. She knew what she wanted. The plan was set. She would marry him, and then begin project, divorce him. On the other side, her ex, Gunho, was on his knees, begging his mother with tears in his eyes to let him be with Subin again. His mother shouted furiously, asking how her son could reduce himself to this state for a girl like that. But Gunho insisted if he couldn't be with Subin, he'd rather die. Shocked by his words, his mother could hardly bear to see him in such a pitiful condition. She had been the reason behind their breakup, but she never imagined it would break her son this deeply. Meanwhile, Subin stood in the hallway of the restaurant, her shift almost over. Just one last guest to attend to. Hearing footsteps and voices, she put on her professional smile and turned to greet them, only for her eyes to widen the next second. It was her, the woman who had once been her almost mother-in-law, the very one who had torn her and Gunho apart. Whatever the reason behind her visit, Subin had to stay professional. She calmly led the ladies to the dining area and served them delicious dishes with practiced grace. The woman casually asked, "Is your father doing well now?" and followed up, "Your mother still runs that little food stall in front of the school?" Subin simply stared, her lips parting but no words coming out. One of the other ladies asked Gunho's mother if she knew the server. With a smirk, the woman replied, "How could I know a girl who serves food at a restaurant? She just once chased after my son." Subin said nothing. She simply bowed politely and left the room. When the ladies finished their meal, they paid for the service, and on her way out, the woman pulled out some cash and offered it to Subin as a tip. Not wanting to cause a scene, Subin took the money quietly. Her colleague, fuming beside her, could barely contain her anger. But Subin remained surprisingly calm. After her shift, she changed out of her uniform and stepped outside the restaurant. As she passed by, the woman called out to her, clearly waiting to talk. Standing face to face, Subin asked bluntly, "What do you want to talk about?" Still holding her arrogant attitude, the woman asked, "How long are you going to keep doing this job? Why don't you work in an office instead?" Subin replied flatly, "And why should I do that?" The woman answered simply, "Because my son is a doctor. I can't stand seeing my future daughter-in-law working in a restaurant serving food. He's too soft-hearted to turn his back on you." Subin paused, taken aback. But soon, she understood. So that's why she came here. Not for Subin, but because her son was still crying over her. She remembered. It was this very man, Gunho, who had proposed to her, who had made promises to always be with her. But when she met his mother for the first time, sweet at first, she had quickly shown her true colors the moment Gunho was out of earshot. The woman had simply waited for an opportunity. And as soon as Subin's father had his accident, she told her to break up with Gunho. The memory still ached inside her. Now, Subin stood firm. "And who are you to tell me what I should do?" Furious and confused, the woman shouted in frustration. But Subin cut her off sharply, telling her not to meet her again in the future. The woman, now shouting louder, threatened, "I'll tell my son about your rude behavior." But Subin only smirked, slightly tilting her head back. "Thanks to you, I found someone better," she said calmly. Just then her phone rang. It was Yejun. "Are you free now?" he asked casually. Gunho's mother stood nearby, hearing the conversation, confused by Subin's relaxed tone. As the call ended, Subin looked at her again. "Thanks again," she said. "Because I'm getting married soon." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the money the woman had given her earlier, handing it back with a smile. Subin walked away, leaving the woman stunned and furious. How could a mere girl dare to insult her like this? She fumed. She must be lying. No way she found a good man. Determined to see for herself, she rushed outside. But what she saw left her speechless. A handsome man stood beside Subin, their posture natural, affectionate, like a real couple. The man smiled at her before gently guiding Subin away. As the car pulled off, Subin glanced in the mirror and saw the woman still standing behind them in a daze. She smiled faintly to herself. Perfect timing, she thought. And best of all, with Yejun, I didn't even have to pretend too much. She silently praised him. Marrying him might not be so bad after all. Yejun, catching her mood, smiled in response, clearly accepting her unspoken compliment. As they reached home, Subin's anxiety kicked in. They were about to meet her parents, and the man she was going to introduce was none other than Yejun. The thought of how her parents would react made her nervous. Trying to distract herself, she asked Yejun how his family reacted to the news. He answered casually, "Nothing much. Besides, my mother and sibling are on vacation, so tomorrow you'll only be meeting my father." Subin blinked, confused. How can everyone be on vacation when they're supposed to be meeting for something this important? At her home, her parents were a bit shocked upon seeing the man their daughter had brought with her. She stood tall and introduced him, announcing confidently, "This is the man I'm going to marry, Yejun." As they all sat down at the dinner table, the real confrontation began. Her parents asked if he was planning to do anything about the debt. But Yejun, with a polite and disarming smile, replied, "I'm only here to take away your precious daughter." And just like that, he transformed into the perfect son-in-law, madly in love with their daughter. Subin stood beside him, quietly observing how brilliantly he was acting. His words, his expressions, he was flawless. Then, as if remembering something, he took out a bouquet of flowers he had forgotten earlier. Her mother's eyes lit up in awe at his thoughtfulness. In the next moment, he gently pulled Subin closer, sliding his arm around her shoulders and softly wishing her good night. As he left, Subin let out a sigh of relief. Seeing her parents happy, finally, everything had gone perfectly. But the next morning, it was her turn to visit his house. As expected, only his father was at home. She politely greeted him, and he responded with the same level of courtesy. They sat at the dining table, and an awkward, pin-drop silence filled the room. Subin took it all in. The house was large and beautiful, almost like something from a magazine. But something didn't feel right. Despite the elegant surroundings, the atmosphere between father and son was strangely cold. It was clear they were uncomfortable with each other. As they prepared to leave, Subin pulled out a small gift that her parents had prepared. She offered it with a gentle smile. Yet, even as they walked out, a strange unease settled over her. There wasn't anything overtly wrong, nothing particularly uncomfortable had happened, but something felt off, deeply off. And Yejun, the man beside her, had carried himself in that house with a cold, distant aura. Around his father, he felt like a completely different person. Next, they went to meet Yejun's grandmother. As a gift, Subin brought some good oriental medicine for her. Yejun's grandmother was delighted to meet her granddaughter-in-law, warmly wishing them beautiful children and earnestly requesting Subin always to stay by her grandson's side. Yejun quietly observed their interaction from nearby, wondering how Subin was the same as he had known her since childhood. Finally, one day, both families met officially. Subin with her parents and Yejun with his parents and siblings. The elders enthusiastically discussed wedding arrangements, while the siblings showed no interest whatsoever. Subin realized it might take a long time before she could comfortably get along with them. The meeting ended with mutual thanks, officially confirming their marriage. On her wedding day, Subin stood beautifully dressed in a white gown, holding flowers. This was the day she had dreamed of her entire life, imagining that when the curtains opened to reveal her, the groom waiting would fall in love with her again, perhaps even with exaggerated delight. Yet, in reality, almost no one was there. Only her mother sat quietly, underscoring that this marriage was indeed fake. Despite this, Subin still felt happiness, knowing at least she wasn't alone, and that was enough for now. Soon, Subin stood at the entrance alongside her father. Noticing his anxiety, she gently advised him to stay calm. He nodded slightly, anxious not to make mistakes. After all, he had practiced this moment diligently for several days. Supported by her loving father, Subin began her walk down the aisle. Halfway through, her father softly called out to her, wishing her happiness and advising her to live well. His heartfelt words instantly filled her eyes with tears. Everyone around her seemed genuinely happy, yet Subin couldn't shake the sense of guilt rising within her. At the altar, her father offered Subin's hand to Yejun, earnestly asking him to take care of his daughter. Yejun looked at her face, now streaked with flowing tears. With trembling hands, she took his, and it was time for their vows. Yejun went first, promising to care for her, cherish her, and love her faithfully. Subin followed, promising to stay by his side in happiness and in sickness for the rest of her life. With their vows exchanged, they were officially declared husband and wife. As the ceremony ended, Yejun noticed Subin still trembling and pouting slightly. "Are you crying?" he asked. "No, I don't cry," she replied stubbornly, trying to hide her vulnerability. Gently, Yejun raised his hand and wiped away her tears. Calmly, he requested she stop crying, adding playfully with a smirk, "Because crying makes your face look uglier." Annoyed, Subin sighed, yet soon smiled warmly back at him. Their wedding ceremony concluded successfully. During their honeymoon flight, Subin quickly dozed off, resting her head heavily on Yejun's shoulder. He tried to move her gently, but when she didn't budge, he harshly shoved her face in the other direction. Unbothered, she continued sleeping deeply. Irritated, he pulled out his neck pillow, placing it around her neck to support her properly. They soon arrived in Hawaii for their honeymoon. Subin was thrilled. Even though their marriage was fake, the vacation was real. Yejun handed her a keycard, explaining he had booked 2 separate rooms, as they'd agreed not to interfere with each other's privacy during the trip. In her room, Subin relaxed onto the bed, grateful for this break after days of worry. Determined, she decided to enjoy delicious food and exciting activities to the fullest. Just then, her phone buzzed. It was her mother asking how the trip was going and about Yejun. Subin quickly lied that he was taking a shower, and her mother ended the call, requesting a video call later. Subin sighed with relief, only to have her phone ring again. This time, it was her mother-in-law, also curious about their trip and asking for a handbag as a gift. She had tried calling Yejun first but got no answer. Subin repeated the same excuse, and her mother-in-law also requested a video call later. She had thought she was finally free, but clearly she was not. She stepped out, only to find Yejun standing outside his room with an equally annoyed expression. Realizing they had no other choice, they reluctantly went to dinner together. During dinner, Yejun suddenly snapped a picture of Subin with her eyes closed. Panicking, she begged him to delete it, but it was too late. He had already sent it. Soon, they video called her parents, who joyfully admired their favorite couple enjoying their honeymoon. Once all calls were finished, Yejun waved goodbye and quickly left, leaving Subin behind. However, Subin didn't mind. She was surrounded by delicious food, contentedly wondering what else she could possibly need. Meanwhile, Yejun sat alone on his room's balcony, quietly enjoying the sunset. The next day, Subin was determined to fully enjoy the trip. However, everywhere she went was filled with affectionate couples, emphasizing that her travel companion was Yejun, a cold, indifferent man. Undeterred, she took out her selfie stick, enthusiastically recording and photographing beautiful locations to show their families. Later, she booked a cruise dinner, ticking it off her bucket list. Although surrounded by loving couples as she admired the sunset alone, she still enjoyed herself, wishing her parents could experience this beauty as well. Deep in thought about choosing a drink, she was suddenly startled. Yejun had appeared unexpectedly. Even though they'd traveled together, it felt like ages since she'd seen him. Casually, she shared details of her day, prompting surprise from Yejun, who questioned if she really went on the cruise alone. Annoyed, Subin flipped her hair and confidently replied that she could go wherever she pleased. After all, they were in Hawaii. Yejun inquired about her plans for tomorrow. Lazily, she mentioned snorkeling at Hanauma Bay, then felt irritated for obediently answering like a docile wife. Quickly bidding him goodnight, she returned to her room, later sitting by the window with a drink, admiring the perfect moonlit scenery. The next morning, while posing for a photo, Subin's hat flew off due to a gust of wind. Just as it nearly disappeared off the hill, a strong hand grabbed it. Subin felt a sturdy presence above her. It was none other than her handsome husband, Yejun, who harshly placed the hat back on her head, playfully scolding her. The nearby couple taking her photo asked if the man was with her. Before she could respond, Yejun confidently introduced himself as her husband. The words felt unfamiliar yet true, prompting Subin to confirm, "Yes, he's my husband." The couple offered to take a photo of them together. Initially, there was distance, but Yejun teasingly pulled Subin closer, remarking they weren't taking ID photos. As she playfully argued, he poked her side, making her laugh genuinely. The result was a perfect snapshot of a happy couple on their honeymoon. Following Yejun to the seaside, Subin felt pleased. It wasn't bad spending time together after all. When snorkeling, however, her inexperience left her coughing up water on the shore. She lay on the seaside with a pale face. Yejun arrived, hovering above her, offering help while also making fun of her. He helped her adjust her mask and regulator and instructed her to breathe through her mouth. As usual, their training turned into more bickering than anything serious, drawing curious stares from the people around. Eventually, though, she learned how to breathe underwater. Excitedly, she shared her success with Yejun, who stood ready with flippers. It was time for the next step. He next instructed her on how to relax her muscles, kick with her calves, and use her thighs to swim gently. And with that, she was finally able to do it. She dove underwater, and the scenery beneath was magnificent. As she marveled at the view, she noticed another body glide past. It was Yejun, swimming skillfully beneath the surface, playfully interacting with the fish. She couldn't deny that it was a scene worth capturing, so she pulled out her phone and snapped the perfect picture of her husband. After leaving the seaside, they were both hungry. Subin suggested returning to the hotel for lunch, but Yejun had other plans. He pulled out a card. He had rented a car. With a teasing smile, she asked if he had booked it for her. Yejun replied nonchalantly that she could go back if she didn't like it. But how could she miss a lovely ride in a dream car like this? They had a beautiful drive and enjoyed shrimp dishes together. Afterward, Yejun said he was tired and suggested going back. But Subin really wanted to go somewhere else. She had heard about pineapple ice cream and desperately wanted to try it. However, Yejun coldly rejected the idea, saying it tasted the same everywhere and she could have it back in their city. She insisted, pleading like a spoiled child, but he remained firm. Finally, he reminded her that if she didn't get in the car in 3 seconds, he'd leave her behind. With no other choice, they drove back. Bored and annoyed, she soon fell asleep, occasionally mumbling about the pineapple ice cream she had wanted so badly. When she opened her eyes, she felt something cold near her face. Fully awake and ready to scold whoever it was, she froze when she saw Yejun standing there, with pineapple ice cream in his hand. He still threatened her, saying that if she didn't take it by the count of 3, he'd throw it away. She couldn't believe it. Was this a dream? But no, it was real. Pineapple ice cream right in front of her. She quickly took it, savoring the first delicious bite. Her eyes drifted toward Yejun, who was also licking his own ice cream, still looking cold and indifferent. But Subin smiled to herself. As cold as he had listened. And if she had to pick one unforgettable day from this trip, it was definitely the day she spent with Yejun. With that, their honeymoon came to an end, and it was time to return to reality. As they returned, Yejun suggested visiting his family home that same day. Subin, exhausted, argued, asking if they couldn't postpone until tomorrow. Yejun reasoned that visiting while tired meant they wouldn't be expected to stay for dinner. Subin was puzzled. Was he considering her feelings? Wouldn't it be more awkward around her family? Yejun nonchalantly explained that meeting her parents was actually less awkward than facing his own. Still confused, Subin watched as Yejun happily informed his in-laws of their safe return. Soon they arrived at his home, distributing gifts to everyone. However, no one seemed particularly interested except for his mother, who eagerly opened the bag she had specifically requested. Delighted, she immediately retreated to her room to match it with an outfit. Subin observed this, puzzled. Was the bag the only thing she had waited for? Did she not miss her son? Subin glanced at Yejun, who was calmly sipping his tea, completely indifferent. Next, his sister Yena took out her gift and sarcastically criticized Subin's choice, calling the bag old-fashioned. She further taunted Subin, saying that if she had no fashion sense, cash would have been preferable. Subin, who had spent significant time selecting the gifts, felt upset but smiled apologetically, unable to argue. Unexpectedly, Yejun intervened, calmly stating that he had personally chosen the bag. Instantly, Yena's attitude shifted, now claiming the bag's design was actually classic. She too left the room hastily to find matching clothes, leaving Subin even more bewildered. Yejun's father kindly asked Subin not to take his daughter's behavior to heart, explaining that Yena was young and spoiled. Subin quickly assured him that she wouldn't. After leaving the house, Subin finally breathed a sigh of relief. Yejun explained that, as she'd seen, his family was indeed difficult to get along with, especially for someone like her. At this, Subin turned sharply, asking what he meant by someone like her. Yejun, avoiding her gaze, confessed he'd observed her since childhood. She was raised with love and warmth, things completely unfamiliar to him. He explained further that his father had insisted on the marriage, mainly because of his grandmother, fully aware it was fake. Therefore, Yejun assured her she didn't have to impress him or his mother. He mentioned his brother rarely spoke but was the most normal among them, while she had already experienced Yena's difficult personality. Yejun then added that Yena only listened to him within their family. "Does she acknowledge you as her older brother, then?" Subin asked curiously. He turned towards her, casually replying, "She just acknowledges my good looks." Subin sighed, realizing her reasoning wasn't entirely wrong. Nevertheless, Yejun suggested she at least try to reconcile with Yena. Thinking about his family's eccentricities, Subin already felt exhausted. It was clear his father saw her as no different from a maid or a servant. Yejun reminded Subin that they should write a contract. "Isn't that already done?" she asked, confused. Yejun explained that while the legal paperwork was completed, their life living together would begin tonight, and they should write down a contract with basic rules. Subin sighed. He really was the son of a businessman. They sat down with a pen and paper and began writing out the basics. Subin had only two conditions, that Yejun be a good son-in-law and that they respect each other's privacy without causing harm. Yejun's terms included privacy, personal space, and a strict rule to never tell anyone about their marriage contract. However, Yejun clarified that she didn't need to act like a good daughter-in-law to his family, just treat his grandmother as she was already doing. Suddenly remembering something, Subin mumbled something under her breath. Yejun, confused, asked what she was talking about. She tried again to explain, but he still couldn't hear and asked her to speak up. Frustrated, she finally shouted, "What about touching? Is there any rule for that?" They were an adult man and woman living together. How could there be no possibility of physical contact? And what if they had to act like a real couple in front of others? Yejun clearly replied that there was no need for that, because it was impossible between them. As for public appearances, he scoffed, asking why they should show affection to others. They weren't living in a Western society. Subin wasn't satisfied and reached out to add the clause to their contract, but Yejun quickly snatched the paper from her. "There's no need for that," he said firmly. Infuriated, Subin shouted, "Don't you know what can happen between a man and a woman?" Yejun made a face. "Stop dreaming. I'm not going to touch you." Her mouth dropped open. Wasn't that an insult? Annoyed, she told him, "Well, I'm not interested in you either, so keep your hands off me." "I'm not crazy enough to try anything," Yejun snapped. Subin was beyond annoyed and stomped her foot in frustration. Meanwhile, Yejun gave instructions. Her room was on the left and his on the right. If their parents ever visited, they'd pretend his room was their shared room, but otherwise they were not allowed to enter each other's spaces. He strictly warned her not to make excuses like being drunk to barge into his room. She immediately fired back with the same energy, telling him to respect her space too. Scoffing, he reminded her that she was the one who always got drunk and caused a mess. She sarcastically called him Mr. Perfect. With that, they both made their way to their separate rooms. Still annoyed, Subin swung open her door, but in the very next moment, her eyes sparkled. The room exceeded her expectations. It had a separate powder room, something she had always wanted. A large bath, her very own. And a walk-in closet, too. All her frustration melted away as she flopped onto the soft bed, eyes full of wonder. But one thing was certain. This was the first night in their married home. The next day, as planned, they visited Subin's house. Her parents welcomed them with bright smiles. Her mom greeted Yejun first, which made Subin annoyed. Wasn't she her mom first? Her mother quickly embraced her, trying to soothe her irritation. She had prepared a wide variety of dishes for her daughter and son-in-law. Yejun, acting the part of a perfect son-in-law, thanked her sincerely for all the hard work. Subin quietly observed him. He had been so cold in his own home, but here he was a completely different person. What a good actor. Noticing her gaze, Yejun looked at her as if asking what she was staring at. She didn't reply, both simply smiled and continued eating. But her father was sharp. He instantly picked up on the odd atmosphere between them. Later, when Yejun helped her mother move some bulky items, she tried to stop him, saying there was no way she'd let her son-in-law do such work. Subin, however, casually told her to let him help. Her mother scolded her in return. How could she treat her husband like that? Her father, catching the opportunity, asked if something had happened during their honeymoon. He said they didn't really look like a newlywed couple, and instead seemed rather awkward. Subin hurried to smooth things over, assuring them nothing had happened. Her mother pressed again, demanding the truth. Subin again assured her nothing happened. Afterward, they enjoyed some freshly cut fruits before excusing themselves, claiming work obligations. Sitting in the car, Subin sighed with relief. It was the first time in her life she had rushed to leave her own home. Even before marriage, her mother had a habit of asking questions that made her uncomfortable. Yejun asked, "What kind of questions?" Subin recalled the night before her wedding. Her mother had asked who proposed first, what her son-in-law liked about her daughter, and whether she was truly happy with the marriage. Subin had nodded, reassuring her mother with confident answers. Satisfied, her mother smiled and said that now she could die in peace. Subin had shouted, "How can you talk about dying all of a sudden?" Her mother had just laughed, patting her hand and assuring her that she wasn't going to die, at least not until she saw her grandchild born. She pressed Subin's hand gently and said, "Live well, my daughter." Subin couldn't bring herself to say anything more. Only one word escaped her lips, "I will." As they reached home, Subin suggested that they needed to do something about the situation. Yejun, busy working, glanced at her over his glasses. "We can't go on like this," Subin said. "What happened today could happen again." Yejun removed his glasses and looked at her seriously. "So what do you suggest?" She explained that since they were going to live as a couple for a year anyway, they should practice behaving like one. Specifically, practice the so-called HSD. Huh? What's HSD? Yejun asked, confused. It stands for honey, sweetheart, and darling, she explained. We need to start calling each other with these words naturally, and to make it feel normal, we should practice it 3 times a day. Yejun, as usual, rejected the idea outright. "I'm not going to do that," Subin argued, reminding him of his concern for his grandmother. "Adults aren't fools. If we keep going like this, they'll figure it out." Yejun fell silent. She wasn't entirely wrong. Finally, he agreed. Proudly, Subin poked his cheek. "Now you see my reasoning." He tried to brush her hand away. "So, what exactly do I need to do 3 times a day?" She laid out the plan. They had to use one of the 3 affectionate words when leaving for work, returning from work, or during a call. "It'll become natural over time," she added. "Eventually, we'll be able to show affection without awkwardness." Yejun nodded. "Fine by me." She insisted they start practicing immediately. He frowned. "Can't we start tomorrow?" "Nope," she said firmly, grabbing his hand. As their eyes met, they both burst out laughing. It was so unlike them. "Since it was your idea, you go first," Yejun said. Subin frowned. "That's not fair. Let's decide with rock, paper, scissors." They raised their hands and Subin lost. She cursed under her breath while Yejun sat back arrogantly, clearly enjoying his victory. He demanded she begin practicing. Subin cringed. It was so embarrassing. She almost cursed herself for suggesting such a ridiculous idea. Determined, she raised her hand. "Give me your hand," she said. With an unreadable expression, Yejun complied. She froze, suddenly nervous, but also a little excited. Noticing her hesitation, Yejun pulled her close and placed her hand over his heart to set the premise. She sat beside him and began. "You did well today being a good son-in-law," she said with a trembling voice. Yejun looked at her straight-faced. "Doing good. Continue." Now came the hard part. She had to pick one of the words. With a whisper, she said, "Sweetheart." "What?" "Couldn't hear you," Yejun replied. She shouted it louder, piercing his ears. "Sweetheart." Immediately after, she stood up, horrified at what she had just done, and ran off to her room, completely embarrassed. Yejun sat there stunned. Then slowly he smiled. "How are we going to do this every day?" The next day, Subin had to leave early, and they stumbled into each other in the hallway. She quickly apologized and waved goodbye before heading out. Checking the time, she realized she still had some buffer. Though her married life had just begun, her daily routine had already shifted. Each morning, she now had to walk 10 minutes to her in-law's house to help Yejun's mother prepare breakfast. It was a long-standing family rule, originating from her grandfather's time, that everyone in the household eat breakfast together, except on Sundays. Strangely, Yejun had never mentioned this tradition to her. Or did he did it on purpose? Subin remembered, when they had spoken with his father, Yejun had clearly defended her, saying she had work and couldn't help with breakfast. But his father had remained firm. Now that his grandmother had returned, and the tradition was rooted by his grandmother, he couldn't allow the rule to be broken. Considering Yejun's grandmother's health, Subin had agreed. After all, she had signed up to be Yejun's wife, even if it was only in name, so she'd endure the responsibilities. There was, however, one small problem. Yejun's mother wasn't exactly good at cooking, even though she'd been doing it for years. As everyone gathered at the breakfast table, Subin could clearly sense the dissatisfaction in the air. Still, she also noticed the effort Yejun's mother put in despite the criticism. Later, as they headed to work, Subin mentioned to Yejun how hard his mother had it that morning. Yejun, ever blunt, replied, "Then you just have to work harder. Good luck with that." Subin pouted at his cold response. As he dropped her off at her workplace, she stepped out of the car, still frowning. What a cold person. Yet, deep down, she was also grateful. His workplace was in the opposite direction, and he still made time to drop her off. After work, Subin went shopping. She had received a good recipe from her mother earlier and picked up all the necessary ingredients. She even informed Yejun's mother in advance, just in case she had already made plans. Luckily, she hadn't. To make her help more believable, Subin told a small lie, that her mother had brought too much food and they had enough for 2 houses. Yejun's mother bought the story and thanked Subin's mom. When Yejun returned home, he noticed Subin in the kitchen. "What are you doing this late?" he asked. "I'm preparing base ingredients for breakfast," she replied. "Weren't you tired?" he asked. She responded bluntly, "If I say yes, will you help?" "No," he answered immediately. Subin made a face. "Then what's the point of asking?" Still, she finished her preparations and neatly stored everything in the fridge, proud of her effort. Yejun, sipping water beside her, observed everything silently before commenting, "Are you working so hard so that you can be free from this before a year?" Subin walked over, grabbed his hand, and smiled sweetly. "Honey, do you think your wife is that irresponsible? Don't worry, you must be tired, go get some rest." Yejun stood frozen, clearly surprised. For Subin, today's HSD practice was complete. He looked at her, recovering quickly, and responded with a small smile. "Thanks for the hard work." They looked like a perfectly happy couple. But the moment they turned and walked in opposite directions, both their faces dropped, as if they had just done something terribly wrong. The next day, at the breakfast table, Yejun's sister tried to argue her way out of attending, but at their father's command, she had no choice but to sit down. Subin noticed that the family's breakfast rule was meant to create bonding moments, yet everyone looked as if they were sitting on individual thrones, disconnected from one another. She nervously wondered if they would like her dish, but to her surprise, everyone enjoyed it. Seeing the moment as the perfect opportunity to test their practice, she gently patted her husband's hand and asked sweetly if he wanted more. Yejun froze at her sudden change in demeanor, but quickly realized she was putting on a show for the others. So he smiled and thanked her, playing his part. They beamed at each other like a couple deeply in love, making his grandmother's face glow with joy at the sight of her favorite pair. After breakfast, Yejun dropped Subin off at her workplace. On the way back, he found himself thinking about how hard she was working at home despite having to work even on Saturdays. He spent his free day swimming and reading, and later while shopping, he came across some of Subin's favorite snacks. It wasn't like him, but on impulse, and perhaps because of her calling him honey, he bought them for her. That night, just as he was about to eat dinner, his phone rang. It was Subin. "Have you eaten?" she asked. Yejun frowned. "No need to check on me, just get to the point." Subin explained that she was out with her colleagues and they really wanted to meet him. Yejun immediately declined. "Don't bother me with things like that." But then he heard a man calling Subin by her first name, sounding far too familiar. "Have some of this? I warmed it up for you," the man said. Yejun's mind raced. Who was this guy warming up food for someone else's wife? Without thinking, he asked, "Where are you?" On the other end, Subin was shocked. He was actually coming? That wasn't like him at all. Yet, a short while later, Yejun arrived, dressed in a suit, greeting everybody. Her colleagues couldn't stop complimenting the handsome man, and the same guy who had called Subin by name greeted him using her name again. Yejun hated it. He quickly introduced himself as Subin's husband, took off his blazer, and sat beside her, deliberately placing himself between Subin and the man. Subin was confused. Why had he actually come? And why was he dressed so formally instead of in his usual home clothes? Leaning in close, Yejun whispered, "I was in my boxers at home. Should I have come in those?" Subin clapped her hands over her ears in embarrassment, telling him to shut up. Her colleagues saw them whispering and took it as a sign of their newlywed affection. As the evening progressed and games began, Subin drank a lot while Yejun kept away from alcohol. One of the men suggested that Subin ask her husband to drink in her place, her black knight. Drunk, Subin turned toward Yejun and asked in a sultry voice, "Will you be my black knight?" Yejun rubbed the back of his neck, annoyed. "Can't we just go home already?" The crowd buzzed with excitement. If the black knight refused, Subin would have to drink twice. Yejun shook his head. "I'm not drinking." Subin's mouth dropped open. Was he really not going to do it? She downed her drink in annoyance, muttering that she'd deal with him at home. Soon she began to feel sick. Yejun pulled the glass away from her hand. He couldn't let her get more drunk. The man next to him offered, "I'll carry you if you get drunk." Yejun smiled, but internally he was fuming. He'd kick the guy if he touched him. Then he bottomed up the drink. Subin smiled, proud. He had become her black knight. Drink after drink, Yejun kept going. Subin nudged him. "Make me your black rose so I can drink now." Yejun refused. "You shouldn't drink." The girls around them were swooning, finding even his rejection charming. But the truth was, Yejun had hit his limit. Moments later, he collapsed on the table with a loud thud. Now it was Subin's turn to carry him. The man from earlier stepped forward to help, but drunken Yejun, red in the face, stared at his outstretched hand, dodged it, and declared, "No one else can touch me. Only my wife is allowed. And the same goes for her. No one touches my wife except me." Then he added, "And don't call her like that. I don't like it." Subin, flustered, did her best to support the drunken man who was still glaring at the other guy. He leaned on her, demanding, "Carry me, I can't walk." She couldn't believe the grown man she now had to manage. Still, she took it as a chance to repay him for the time he carried her when she was drunk. Back home, she flopped him onto the sofa and headed to shower. Afterward, she felt refreshed. But what was she supposed to do with the drunken man now? He had clearly forbidden her from entering his room. She approached him and called his name. He lay in the same position, one hand dangling off the sofa, his blazer slipping off one shoulder, his face red from drinking. She pinched his cheek just like he had once done to her. No reaction. She decided to carry him to his room. What she didn't know was that Yejun, now sober, was pretending to sleep. He figured they were almost at his room anyway, so why not just let her do it? As she struggled to carry him, her bathrobe slipped slightly, revealing her cleavage. Yejun noticed but remained still. Finally, she reached his bed and pushed him onto it. He lay there half-turned, hoping she would just leave. But after a while, he realized she was still there. Opening his eyes slightly, he saw her hovering above him. She grabbed his shoulders and rolled him fully onto his back. He flinched but didn't move, still pretending to be asleep. Then she started unbuttoning his shirt. He could feel her fingers on his chest, and the sensation was too real to ignore. In one swift motion, he flipped their positions, pinning her beneath him. Subin's eyes widened. Was it the position, or the realization that he was awake? Yejun met her gaze, his sharp eyes full of confusion, or maybe something else. "What the hell are you doing, Subin?" he asked, his voice low, still hovering above her. Subin lay still, her bathrobe slightly undone, unable to utter a single word.